Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you happenstance into this panel discussion with the new Untouchables. We are recording this on Friday, January 9th, 2026, at approximately 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Obviously, it's a monumental week, and we'll get right into it, but I want to do introductions first. So please bear with me as I make sure we all know who we're talking to on this panel discussion, as I believe that the expertise and the professionalism that will be unwound here is going to be something that we all need to pay a lot of attention to. On my screen, to my upper right, is Marc Dan. Marc Dan is the former Attorney General of the state of Ohio. He's in private practice in consumer law for the Dan Law Firm out of Cleveland, Ohio. Immediately below him, we have Paul Peltier, a veteran of nearly 3 decades with the Department of Justice, currently also in private practice, as well as an adjunct professor at George Washington University. On my screen in the center, we have Lewis Clark, the executive director of the Government Accountability Project. To Lewis's immediate left on my screen, and I apologize if that's confusing for some of you watching on the other end, but William K. Black, a gentleman who has been our mentor for now many, many years, but a man who's been in the trenches of regulation, economics, all things legal expertise as one of the country's, as David K. Johnston pointed out last week, premier regulators in the country, who is responsible for the savings and loan crisis investigations and subsequent convictions, and much, much more. I will include everybody's descriptions obviously below. And then on the bottom here, and obviously on the top of all of our analysis, of course, is June Carbone, who is the Rabina Chair of Law, Science, and Technology at the University of Minnesota. And obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, I apologize, someone who also studied at Yale Law School, which I think is going to come into play here as we discuss our vice president. And then on my upper left, directly next to me, is my colleague for many, many years, a journalist, an incredible producer, and a director, the proprietor of Red Point Digital Media, and the director of Forward 13, Waking Up the American Dream, and The Con. So I welcome you all. Thank you so much for your time today. I think I'd like to start off the conversation by sharing my screen, and I'd like to get the New York Times footage of the incident that took place in Minneapolis regarding, of course, the young woman, Nicole Good, Renee Nicole Good, pardon me, who was shot by ICE police 2 days ago, and obviously the subsequent information that has been pouring through our screens and through social media over the course of the last several days, a couple of days, pardon me. So I'll start playing this, and hopefully, because YouTube is slightly wonky, hopefully this plays through. And if you don't hear it on your end, guys, please just raise your hand and let me know. So I'm going to start things off with this video.
I'm not hearing audio.
Yeah, I'm not either.
I think
Go ahead, Eric.
the speaker needs to be turned on the bottom right.
Okay. Um, I'm going to slightly, I'm going to pause here for a second, and then I'm going to sort that out.
On Wednesday, in Minneapolis, a federal agent fatally shot a motorist, 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good. Trump administration officials said these were, quote, defensive shots fired because the officer was being run over.
And a woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over.
But our analysis of bystander footage, filmed from different angles, appears to show the agent was not in the path of the victim's SUV when he fired 3 shots at close range. Here's how events unfolded. Moments before the shooting, the victim's maroon SUV is stopped in the middle of the street. Multiple unmarked federal vehicles are idling nearby. Secretary Noem alleged the motorist, quote, was blocking the officers in. Bystanders are blowing whistles and yelling at federal agents. Then, federal vehicles start moving toward the maroon SUV, with sirens and lights blaring. A federal agent films the scene on his phone. The driver rolls forward slightly, turning left, then stops and waits for others to go ahead. 2 agents exit this silver pickup and walk toward the vehicle. Moments later, shots are fired. Let's look at the scene again more closely. This is the agent who shoots the driver. He walks around the car filming and disappears from view. Other agents pull up and order the driver to exit her vehicle. One of them grabs at the door handle and reaches inside. The SUV reverses, then turns right, apparently attempting to leave. At the same time, the agent filming crosses toward the left of the vehicle and grabs his gun. He opens fire on the motorist and continues shooting as she drives past. The moment the agent fires, he is standing here, to the left of the SUV, and the wheels are pointing to the right, away from the agent. This appears to conflict with allegations that the SUV was ramming or about to ram the officer. President Trump and others said the federal agent was hit by the SUV, often pointing to another video filmed from a different angle. And it's true that at this moment in this grainy low-resolution footage, it does look like the agent is being struck by the SUV. But when we synchronize it with the first clip, we can see the agent is not being run over. In fact, his feet are positioned away from the SUV. The SUV crashes into a white car parked down the road. What the? A bystander runs toward the collision. The federal agents on scene do not appear to rush to provide emergency medical care. Eventually, the agent who shot the motorist approaches the vehicle. Seconds later, he turns back around and tells his colleagues to call 911. Agents block several bystanders who attempt to provide medical care, including one who identifies himself as a physician.
Go check a pulse.
Oh, back up now!
I'm a physician.
Hey, listen. At the same time, several agents, including the agent who opened fire, get in their vehicles and drive off, apparently altering the active crime scene.
And I want to show one more thing that I've got pulled up here on YouTube, just for a quick reaction. I'll just play a couple of minutes of this, but this was
Wednesday in Minneapolis.
Oh, shucks.
A federal agent fatally shot a motorist, 37-year-old Renee Nicole.
I'm going to show this brief video conference with, of course, Vice President J.D. Vance, just so we can all kind of, be on the same page in terms of what he said in this official broadcast, I believe, which might have been today. Let's see.
An absolute disgrace, and it puts our law enforcement officers at risk every single day. What that headline leaves out is the fact that that very ICE officer nearly had his life ended, dragged by a car 6 months ago, 33 stitches in his leg. So you think maybe he's a little bit sensitive about somebody ramming him with an automobile? What that headline leaves out is that that woman was there to interfere with a legitimate law enforcement operation in the United States of America. What that headline leaves out is that that woman is part of a broader left-wing network to attack to dox, to assault, and to make it impossible for our ICE officers to do their job. If the media wants to tell the truth, they ought to tell the truth that a group of left-wing radicals have been working tirelessly, sometimes using domestic terror techniques to try to make it impossible for the President of the United States to do what the American people elected him to do, which is enforce our immigration laws. The President stands with ICE. I stand with ICE. We stand with all of our law enforcement officers. And part of that is recognizing that you people in the media, not everybody in this room, but many people in this room have been lying about this attack.
Okay, so I will stop share there, and I will ask the first question, I think, which would be, I think, really a lot of gravity. June, you're a graduate of Yale Law School, and obviously J.D. Vance is an alumni of Yale. What are your thoughts?
We certainly don't want J.D. Vance representing Yale. I mean, he's a liar. We know that. Bill, you need to mute. Let me pause for a moment.
I have my
So, J.D. Vance, when he decided to cast in his lot with MAGA, if not before, is a liar. You have to be a liar to work for the Trump administration. You just saw that. Now, there is a long history of vice presidents as attack dogs. My personal memory is of Spiro Agnew, Richard Nixon's attack dog. And we all know how that ended with his prosecution for accepting bags of money. I don't know anything about Vance's finances, and I'm not suggesting that. But I'm saying he has utterly no regard for, first, the truth. Secondly, for protection, there should be an ongoing murder investigation. Maybe it's a homicide, maybe it's justifiable. There should be an ongoing investigation. Having public officials weigh in with an incomplete knowledge of the facts is egregiously prejudicial and inappropriate in all kinds of ways. These folks in a normal society should be impeached for lying about an incredibly tragic murder and casting dispersions on the victims. It is not that long ago that Charlie Kirk was murdered. And these folks were going after anybody who said a nasty word about Charlie Kirk, a media personality, very controversial. This is a woman who, as far as we know, wasn't doing a whole lot more than driving her car in an area where she had no reason to believe a whole lot of unidentified vehicles were suddenly going to be on the scene. We don't know the facts, her intentions, how she perceived things. We see a whole lot of armed officers without, I mean, if I saw a police car, I'd stay far away. If I see a black vehicle without identification, I might think they're coming to get me. We don't know anything about what really took place. And to have public officials out there with lies, incomplete information, trying to color the public is why we are in the situation we're at, with a country where facts don't matter. One side believes the other side is, and in this case, accurately believes the other side is lying. And getting justice in this case is going to be incredibly difficult because it means taking on the federal government. I wish to recount only one thing. We've had not so long ago, and we've had any number of cases in Minnesota, but we had a case where a police officer was convicted for shooting an unarmed black man in the back as he was fleeing. That officer is still in jail on a 20-year sentence. I don't want to prejudice this case, but I do want a real investigation. And it appears The FBI has been given orders not to cooperate with the state of Minnesota, which is conducting its own investigation, and which is being obstructed from conducting a proper investigation.
Well, Mark, I'd like to ask you from your experience, obviously in government in Ohio. Um, I mean, I just want to tee up one thing really quick, and then you just go whatever direction makes sense. But we saw Tim Walz immediately create what I guess was a warning order about activating the National Guard in Minnesota. And I know you and everybody on this panel have discussed over the course of the last several months the notion that sheriffs could have been used to potentially arrest ICE agents in specific cases. Where are you compelled to react to this? You're on mute.
We're having our senior problems today, Bill, with the mute. I'm sorry about that, and all of you. When George Floyd was killed, Patrick Ellison, I'm sorry, Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minnesota, stepped up and offered to be appointed special or took responsibility as special prosecutor and went ahead and prosecuted the officers that killed him. And they were convicted, and that took courage, but that was the right path. The local prosecutor I viewed as having a conflict because he worked so closely with the Minneapolis Police Department, and the Attorney General stepped in, and that's what AGs around the country can do in many circumstances. Every state has different laws. This should be no different. If the is it Hennepin County prosecutor doesn't step up in prosecute and direct an investigation, then the state attorney general should step in and investigate. There's been a murder on video in the streets of Minneapolis. And it's as simple as that. And so whether somebody should be held accountable for that murder there's no, who are we to say? But except because what who do you? I had a law partner years ago. His closing argument in a case that we didn't have much of a chance in is he goes, "Who do you believe, me or your lying eyes?" Which was basically J.D. Vance's closing argument there when about what happened in that circumstance. And it's this isn't a laughing matter at all. But the fact is that that's the local prosecutor's first responsibility. The local police department should be investigating this crime. The fact that these people were federal officials, it certainly creates some challenges to prosecution, but those are not insurmountable challenges. And honestly, I would go as hard as I could at this murder investigation, whether it be the Minneapolis Police Department, the Sheriff's Department, the county prosecutor, and the state attorney general, using all the resources at their disposal until a federal judge tells them they can't, because there is no line here. When all else fails, follow the statutes. The statutes say murder is a crime, and that the prosecutor is responsible for bringing that prosecution. This is not even a close call, in my opinion. Now, they could present to a grand jury, and the grand jury could decide not to indict, or the prosecutor could come to the conclusion that this isn't even worthy of presenting to a grand jury. That's possible. But the fact is, if the federal employees, because they're not really law enforcement officers. And Patrick, I almost corrected you when you talked about the ICE police. They're not ICE police. They're agents of a federal agency with civil enforcement responsibilities. And so if those agents don't respond to subpoenas to grand juries, then file a motion to compel that to arrest them until they do, and hold them in contempt, just like you would with any other alleged murderer and their accomplices. This is not even a close call in my mind, and I hope that behind the scenes that's what's going on. It doesn't matter what J.D. Vance says. It doesn't matter although I see the deputy director of the FBI left today or yesterday because he thought it would be easier to be a right-wing podcaster than I think he found out that these folks are finding out that these jobs are actually hard, and leaving them. But the fact is, it doesn't matter what the director of the FBI says. I would force the issue. I would file the appropriate process in court. And if you spark a constitutional crisis, well, I can't think of a better time in American history to do that. And it's going to take courageous local officials. It doesn't mean you don't respect federal law enforcement officers, but there's no reason to believe that the FBI is going to do their job here, given who the leadership of the FBI is. And there are many circumstances when state and federal investigations go on simultaneously. That happened in the case of the George Floyd murder. Federal investigators investigated federal crimes using the same evidence and the same witnesses. Certainly, it would be to the advantage of everybody if there were the kind of cooperation that there was at that time between the federal government and the local county police officers. But if there's not, I keep going back to Wilford Brimley in the movie Absence of Malice at the end when he throws a subpoena on the table, and says, it's a wonderful thing. I can make anybody tell me anything I want, and now I'm going to make you tell me the truth about what happened in this circumstance. And if they won't comply, then let a judge tell us. Let a judge tell somebody that it's not. Even this Supreme Court will, I believe, will uphold the rule of law. The concept of federalism that was basic to the founding of this country is that these type of law enforcement investigations of crimes committed in a particular state are left to the state. The state has procedures for them. And look, I don't care if they grandstand. I don't care if they hold a news conference. I just am hoping that behind the scenes, these folks are doing their job. I hope they secured the scene. I hope that they collected the evidence that was available, and that they're beginning the process, as with any murder investigation, to gather what's necessary to present to the grand jury.
Bill, I apologize for that. I want to direct this question to you. Obviously, I want you to go wherever you're compelled, but I do want to point out that the New York Times did have an article earlier in the week about what we've been talking about from the beginning, that the Department of Justice has been purged, right? That white collar fraud investigations and IGs and so on and so forth. It seems like these two things couldn't have happened at a worse time, but wherever you want to go with it.
Okay, so let me start in the June. I think you have the reverb.
She's on mute.
Okay. Then why do we have the reverb? Okay. So first, we live about 6 miles from where this shooting occurred, and it's very personal. And the assault on the community is absolutely critical. Second, I have a PhD in criminology. While my specialty is certainly elite white collar crime and corruption, I've studied these matters in criminology. And we're lawyers here as well. So let's start with the basics. The critical part of the Vance press conference was not part of your clip. The critical part was when he said, the ICE agents are going door to door in Minnesota. That is not law enforcement. That is assuredly not ICE enforcement. Why are they in Minnesota? For expressly political purposes, to try to get Walz to drop out of the running for governor, which they've helped succeed. You don't go door to door. You have no probable cause. You have no reasonable suspicion. You are not act. It isn't simply whether you're Leos or not, law enforcement officers or not. You are not acting cognizant with the fundamentals of American justice. You have become an enemy force deliberately. You are selected to be that. You are trained to be that to the extent there is any training. Second, that gets to the training and it gets to policy. You are not allowed to do what these police, if they were police officers, they would not be allowed to do this. The Justice Department manual prohibits the kind of conduct that you saw. And it prohibits it for good reasons, because it gets people killed for no reason. And by the way, it threatens the lives of the ICE people. So let's start. You don't walk in front of a car. And you don't walk behind the car, because a car can go quickly one of two directions, forwards or backwards. This is an SUV that the minimum for that make and model is 4,000 pounds. Force equals mass times acceleration, physics. These vehicles are very dangerous. One of the things you don't want to do, therefore, is kill the driver while the car is operating, because the car is going to proceed as a 4,000-pound weapon. It is fortunate that it didn't kill a whole ranch of folks. There could have been kids there. You don't shoot in those, you don't unholster your weapon. You do not point it, much less point it at the head of a civilian in these circumstances. What are they extraordinarily likely to do? React. That's what I would do. Someone pointed a gun at me from 3 feet away, and I was in a car. I'd start trying to get the heck out of the range. Maybe they'd miss me. Remember, ICE did this months ago in Chicago and lied about it. Lied about everything about Ms. Martinez. Actually sought to prosecute her when they knew she was absolutely innocent and that the officer had ambushed her. There is video again. You see the ICE vehicle, or its customs vehicle, come around and deliberately T-bone her car. That officer then proceeds to shoot 5 times. Hits her 5 times, creates 7 wounds in her. Immediately or soon begins texting to his compatriots, bragging that he was able to produce 7 holes in 5 shots. Think of that. Do you see that police officer after he shot her? He didn't look depressed. He didn't look shocked. If anything, his walk was a swagger, slow motion down the street. He didn't provide aid. They blocked the doctor. They shouted obscenities at the doctor for trying to come in and help. One of the officers did, right? Every conceivable aspect of police procedure, which largely is done to protect police. Because, you know, a really good way to get shot as a police officer is having a police officer shoot you. Especially people like this who are obviously, however long they've been in, they are violating the most fundamental procedural things that you would literally learn in the first day of a police academy. Martinez, they only, again, after they knew she was absolutely innocent, for deliberately to cover it up, they prosecuted her to try to get a conviction, to dirty her up, when they absolutely knew it was on perjured testimony. And yes, the case is dismissed, but I see no sanction effort That has to come. This is perjury in getting the affidavits, in getting the grand jury indictments by federal officials. And then they let that officer drive the vehicle, which was not his personal vehicle, 1,000 miles to Maine, contaminating, the crime scene in the worst conceivable way. And then I end on this. This is not remotely how bad it will be. They don't actually want to kill 32-year-old white women. What they are desperate for in the Trump administration. Imagine that Vance press conference and that Kristi Noem press conference if this ever gets an ICE official killed. That is their dream. They are set to come out with a full-scale propaganda push, and I bet you they'll introduce a host of laws to destroy rights as well. That is what they want to accomplish.
Paul, I'd like to just ask you your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. Well, so anytime there's a law enforcement shooting, as a former federal prosecutor and defender of law enforcement in many ways, I always look towards not blaming the officer. I always want to believe that in those heat of the moments, things where a lot of people are willing to cast aspersions on law enforcement, that I always try and put myself in their situation. In Miami, I can't even tell you how many times we were in DEA or ATF was in situations with making an arrest, whether it be an undercover buy, or whether it can be a reverse sting, where there were shootouts where either law enforcement were or someone was dead. So I always try and put my frame of reference in the law enforcement officer eyes, because as Marc knows, as AG, and as everybody on this podcast knows, it can be a tough job being in law enforcement when you're facing split-second decisions all the time. I reference a case where a cop, and I was a cop, at least temporarily, when I was in just out of high school, but where a guy was going to throw a rock at him, and he put the gun at him, and the guy says, "Okay, I won't throw the rock." The cop holstered the gun. He threw the rock at the cop, knocked him out, took his gun, and shot 5 shots at him. So you never know what the situation is going to portend. So I always try and not prejudge these things. That being said, you look at the video here, and as Bill says, this ICE agent violated every rule of law enforcement. And no matter how and in situations I'm familiar with, it's almost always law enforcement officers dealing with a bad guy, or a potential bad guy, or someone who they think is a bad guy and a dangerous person. In this case, at best, this lady was a bystander. Ms. Good was a bystander. At worst, she was a protester. In that vein, it is very clear that it is not the law enforcement officer's obligation, duty, or within the realm of his possibility to be unholstering that gun in this situation. We're talking about a protester here. So no matter how much leeway I give law enforcement when they're dealing with face-to-face situations and someone is hurt, in this situation, it is very clear that the ICE agents were the provocateurs here. And what I think that this is a potential, what I call a Kent State moment, right? Where you have people out there legitimately pissed at the government's behavior. In that case, it was Vietnam. In this case, it's these ICE roundups. And when Kent State happened, I think the country turned right then and there. And I hope, I pray that her life is not ended in vain, that this turns out to be a Kent State moment, of which we've had many, but this is one that is so clear and on so many videotapes as to what really is going on here. And I agree with Bill, but I think that something else is going on here too. I think that they are generating these confrontations in the hopes of creating riots, in hopes of creating flashpoints where they can then justify sending in more troops. And I really think that a lot of that is going on. So anyway, all that goes to say is I hope that Ms. Good didn't die in vain, and I do pray in some ways that this is a Kent State moment.
Louis, I think you are very well adept to address that sort of as a picking off point. But just a quick question to you: we've talked in the past about the difficulty of whistleblowers coming forward, obviously, and we've discussed ICE, quite frankly, as one of probably the most difficult. I've got to say, based on what we've discussed and what you guys have led for the last several months, I mean, to Paul's point, I think you'd have to be blind not to see this as a provocation to some degree. I wonder, what are your thoughts, Louis?
Well, first of all, I really don't know about the intentions of the people who have lied to the public about this. I don't know what in other words, I don't know what their plan is. But I can say is that what we saw operating is that they're going to be, is like the top person at the Department of Homeland Security, the vice president, the president. They're just going to come out and they're going to lie like hell to the American public immediately. They're going to cast this woman as a terrorist. It's, without any evidence at all. And I mean, and Vance even admitted, also in that press conference, that he had only seen the video. So he's not operating with any additional information other than the video. And it's very similar to some extent to the riots of January 6th, where, for many years now, we've been told that these people were patriots and they were just like peacefully protesting, et cetera, et cetera. And yet, we saw hours of vicious attacks on a building, and obviously the injury of, dozens and dozens of law enforcement people. And, it's like, it's such a bizarre time in this country's history where you have such leadership that what's important is to get out with the lie as soon as possible and to not really worry about how preposterous it might be. That's what, and then various people with no spines, I think, then just back it up, even though there's so little evidence on anything that they've put forward, like being run over and, the officer being run over, I should say officer, I mean the ICE agent being supposedly run over. I think that what I'm hopeful for is that in the process of the FBI investigation and certainly in terms of the involvement of the Department of Justice to defend the indefensible, that there will be people who will be leaking information and there will be people who will be whistleblowers and who won't lie to the courts, which is why exactly what was earlier stated is that what has to happen in terms of Minnesota officials, local and state, is that they must proceed, aggressively now to start those challenges so that the central the federal government has to defend itself in court as to why this entire operation is not political. I mean, why would you need to immediately send a bunch of additional agents to ICE agents to Minnesota? I mean, it's like the only reason you've done that or are doing that is political. the whole reason of them being there the way that they are and the numbers that they are is probably quite political as well. So I am very, very hopeful and actually somewhat I guess I have a faith and a hope that there will be people in the FBI and there'll be people at the Department of Justice that are not going to want to participate in the charade that has to occur to defend what we all see with our own eyes.
Eric, I want you to go anywhere you want, but I do just have to say, because we shared this, we had an opportunity to speak with Dr. Phil Zimbardo, and in the Lucifer effect, he laid out for us, the slippery slope, right? And what have we been seeing for now the entirety of our sort of relationship here, post Forward 13, right? So not to take you off base, go any direction you want, but I'm sorry, this just seems to be the ultimate portrait of what we've been in the midst of the whole time.
Well, I mean, I feel as though we're looking at something to where there isn't going to be like a direct order to like go and like cause, a certain mayhem. I think what we're seeing is that we're seeing a closing in of the walls by Trump's administration in order to create a scenario that will spark the reprisal that they need in order to justify whatever kind of shit that they want to do. I mean, we're in a world where right out of the gun, this administration used Doge to basically completely destroy any meaningful regulation concerning Wall Street and industry and what have you. And in this same atmosphere, they feel compelled to send 2,000 ICE agents to Minnesota under the idea that they're having to go and enforce something concerning Somali daycare centers. I mean, that was at least part of the justification of sending in these 2,000 ICE agents. And who are these people? I mean, I think that we've discussed it a little bit and touched upon it a little bit, but I mean, they're clearly hiring the worst of the worst and the people who like I said, either haven't been trained or have very little training. But I think that they are selecting people who will do what they want them to do. They're going to get the right people with the right personalities to put them in the right situations in order to create a response. I mean, I feel that that's what's happening. I mean, to my bones, because we keep on seeing it again and again and again. And we hear like some of these stories, like I think was it JD Vance who was talking about like how the ICE agent had previously like been dragged. Um, well, I mean, isn't that just like basically unveiling the fact that they're not screening their people? I mean, because wouldn't there be like, I would imagine that people would have to like have to, pass some sort of a mental or psychological, something in order to be given a gun and put in a position to where they're going to be dealing with the public. I don't know that for sure, but it just seems like that's the case. Perhaps somebody else on the panel can help with that. But if you're putting somebody who is mentally unsound in a situation where they're going to get triggered, well, I don't think that that's the woman's fault for happening to be in a car, as much as it is whoever hired that person and put that person in that situation, if that even had anything to do with this. I mean, I didn't see any distress from that man, in the video that we saw. So I doubt that that's even part of the equation. But even if it were, even if JD Vance is telling the truth in that particular case, and that's like part of what's actually happening here, it shouldn't have been. And him saying that is proof that they are not screening the people that they are putting on the street, and that they're in putting American citizens in danger. In danger of what? In danger of getting shot in the face 3 times. That's the kind of danger that they're putting Americans into by putting unqualified people who wouldn't be able to pass a psychological test in order to do what they're doing. And let's see what the last thing that I have here is that as far as like us, regular people on the streets, I'm not a lawyer. It's like I'm in these situations quite often. I've not been in a situation where people have drawn their guns or anything like that, thank God. And I hope that I never come across that. But I am going to protests. I am on the streets. I am like, involved with these things. And how would I trust that federal agent based off of past behavior? If I'm in a situation to where it's like they're asking me to stop and they're going to pull me out of the car based on the fact that there's been zero accountability on anybody from ICE who is pulling people out of cars, jumping into windows, in buildings in Chicago and all these other things, arresting people who have no business being arrested, sending them off to places like ECOT. How does that give me the requisite trust in that federal official to like say, yes, of course, let me take my hands off the steering wheel and step out of the car? When they have done everything to erode my trust in that federal department. This is all on them. And I don't give a damn what anybody else says. They can't be doing all these things to destroy my relationship with my government and then expect me to act exactly how they want me to act. They just can't. And I won't. That being said, it is also my responsibility to make sure that I don't spark the thing that they want me to spark. Me in the diaspora of like, the people who are out there on the streets. And it's getting more and more difficult every day. And they know that. They know that they are turning the screws every single day. And that makes them culpable of one of the worst, future situations that I can possibly imagine that I hope to God doesn't come to pass.
Well, certainly we don't have to look too far in the rearview mirror to George Floyd and all of those things that came out of Black Lives Matter, that you just basically, being who you are. And of course, I know because we've traveled so much together, your position on Japanese intern camps, because you've had relatives that were actually involved with that. But June, this seems like the sum total of everything that your work compositely, particularly as it relates to young men out of jobs who don't have money, that are, we've seen like the Andrew Tates of the world, this MMA kind of a situation. I know because I have a son the same age, Call of Duty, everything else, being recruited into ICE and then given what, a license to do what they're doing, right? In context, everything else. Where do we need to go in this conversation?
Well, I'm at a law professor conference, and almost every session has started with an acknowledgement of Renee Good and the tragedy of the loss of life. And almost everybody who's been following this closely among law professors then says it was inevitable. If you recruit without screening people, you give them minimal training, and you create an atmosphere that says use of force is perfectly acceptable, this is predictable, utterly predictable. The fact that the shooter appears to have been a long-time ICE agent doesn't really change it. ICE agents aren't really trained. They're not police officers who engage in these situations more frequently. But we have waged a long campaign in the United States to address police violence. And if you compare this to any number of the police shootings, I keep emphasizing, um, we don't see that the person was doing anything. At best, she's a protester. Uh, Police don't have the right to shoot somebody who's fleeing the scene where they're not posing a risk to somebody. They don't, there is a long history of the efforts to take police officers who dehumanize the other and to correct that. And what you have to ask is, and the perspective I bring to this is the article I wrote on legal civil war. The idea that what civil war is, whether it's violent or whether it takes the place of a legal breakdown, is that you have two sides who lose faith in each other. and in the legitimacy of the legal system. Well, Donald Trump has done everything possible to say the law doesn't apply to me. I don't respect the Constitution. I'm out to get my enemies. I am in Minnesota mostly because I don't like walls. And I'm rounding up everybody I can, or at least letting Stephen Miller round up everyone he can, because I don't really like a whole lot of black people and brown people in this country. Now, that's an invitation to say you can't trust the legal system. You can't trust the ordinary order. There's no reason to assume ICE, ICE is acting in good faith when they shoot somebody. Or in Bill's case, they arrest a woman they had shot repeatedly, and then they charge her with crimes, trying to say she is obstructing them. That's the case Bill is describing. And you have a refusal to convict her. But you have on top of that a Supreme Court and conservative judges who have consistently cut back on the mechanisms of accountability. Not, I might add, for police shootings where they do get convictions, but the civil actions that award damages for wrongful acts by public officials. That was created to deal with a case where you had federal officers who raided the wrong home in a drug bust. That was so much less egregious than what we saw in the video today. But that case, the Supreme Court authorized a remedy. In this case, the Supreme Court has been cutting back on the remedies that exist for what seems to be egregious government misconduct, whether it's involuntary manslaughter and negligent homicide or something much more intentional, we don't know. But we have every reason to fear that the investigation will not be one conducted in the interest of finding truth, in the interest of serving justice. And when that happens, I mean, Walz calling up the guard has been something I think is really quite interesting and should be considered. Most of the press accounts are he was criticized for not acting more quickly following the George Floyd riots. He's acting quickly this time. But I also wonder if there isn't a point to Minnesota calling up its National Guard, retaining control of its National Guard, and making sure its National Guard protects protesters, peaceful, lawful protesters from federal officials. And that could trigger a conflict too. One final note, Greg Abbott, and you know, a lot of what Trump does is just performative. He wants to kill people. That's what happened in Venezuela. He was bragging about killing Cubans. And when you set up things designed to produce conflict, you don't always control that conflict. But Greg Abbott and part of the Republican performance on the border called up the Texas National Guard, arguing they were subject to an invasion from Mexico. They placed barbed wire in the Rio Grande River that was designed to and had the effect of killing people. And ultimately, the Biden administration intervened because the Texas National Guard was interfering with the border patrol. And on that point, federal supremacy held, but not a whole lot of other things that Abbott did in the context of the immigration issue. So there are a lot of ways this could get worse, that the violence and conflict could escalate, and that federal officials may well do things that exacerbate rather than tamp down the conflict.
And Marc, as we're kind of closing out time here, you know, I guess the question, it's kind of a two-parted question to you. So what are the plan of the Democrats? And then follow up, what would be your plan if you had influence over the direction of the Democratic Party?
Well, look, one of the challenges in that has been a little more difficult to overcome than I thought it should be in challenging some of the policies of the Trump administration is standing. And as lawyers, before you can challenge a policy or challenge an action, you have to be able to show that you have the right to. There's a conflict, and you actually have the right to bring that challenge. And now we have a cadre of people. We certainly have the family of Ms. Good, which I hope will bring that 1983 action with the power of subpoena and the power to expose what happened and bring the civil action. You have the Hennepin County prosecutor that has standing to investigate a murder that's occurred in his or her, is it him or her? I don't want to be
Her.
miss the
Her.
gender
Her.
in her jurisdiction, and to do her job, and to call the balls and strikes wherever they may land. Uh, Considering the fact that a federal official acting in his official capacity has a degree of immunity from prosecution and from civil rights in the event that their behavior isn't done in a way that's intentional. The agency could potentially have criminal liability here, the enterprise type liability, as well, because of the fact that this is part of a plan, and not this isn't just happenstance or negligence. I mean, this is something more than that. And if there's ever a moment, and I'll defer to the law professors on this, when you can overcome that qualified immunity, this seems to be the moment. And so my hope is that those office holders, Democrat and Republican, step up and do their jobs. And if they do, then we'll get these things to federal court. We'll get these things to the state courts, to the Minnesota Supreme Court, and decisions will be made, and the rule of law will be tested, and hopefully will withstand the test that's coming. And that's my hope. So my hope is that people do their jobs, and if they do, that the legal system will do its job. And that's why we all signed up for this, I think. And that's why I still get up every morning and fight these fights and do these things. And I hope that I look forward to doing what I can personally, and to support the folks that are doing their job there, and wherever the next incident like this happens, because it's going to happen again. I mean, remember, Donald Trump told the New York Times this week that the limits of American power are his mortality and his morality. He didn't say it quite that eloquently, but if you piece together that whole conversation, those were two things he said. That whether it's the Times actually commented on the merging of foreign policy and domestic policy, and the exercise of power in both realms, which have all historically been kept in a very in their own lanes. But at the end of the day, that is not the rule of law. That is, as Gavin Newsom said earlier today, the rule of Don. And we have to bring the rule of Don to an end and restore the rule of law. And the way to do that is to challenge every single act. And now's the time. And especially, when it's great to have the law on your side, but it's also this is a moment when the facts are very strongly in support of the application of law in a way that will protect Americans going forward. And so, and that's exactly the opposite reaction that they're trying to get. They want people in the street out of control, ranting and raving, throwing rocks, and all those kinds of things. Put on a suit, go to the courthouse, and do your job. And nobody is going to be able to argue that that's an insurrection. That's an exercise of the rights of the Constitution that's now been tested for 250 years in this country. And let's prove the beauty and the value of that great document.
Well, I hope that many people are hearing you, Marc, and I hope that we find an alliance with other attorneys out there, other leaders from attorneys general around the United States, to galvanize and press back in the appropriate manner as you've suggested here. Before we close out, I'd like to just kind of leave it open-ended for anybody else to chime in if they feel compelled.
So a subtle point, starting position is really important, and we know this in the law. So the frame by frame can mislead in some ways. The starting position is there's a woman in a car and she's then killed. She's not threatening anyone. Paul's right about split second decisions, but there was no need for a split second decision. Police vehicles have loudspeakers. They get on them and they say, "Move your vehicle, ma'am." She is a Minnesota nice, new to the state. She is waving another driver to go past her. That's typical vile criminal behavior. Think of those things more than the frame by frame. There was no reason. This is entirely the law types that turned this into a tragedy. And then they decided to smear her. And they didn't just kill a 34-year-old woman, they left a 6-year-old child without any parents.
Anyone else at the moment? No? Okay. Well, I want to say thank you for all of your expertise. It's a very trying time for our country. Um, to the audience, I've been witness to massive white collar fraud and corruption in our government now for over a decade. I've been warning everyone forever that corruption leads to fascism. I've been in the streets during No Kings. We've all known about the discussion of martial law. Most of us are aware of January 6th. Most of us are aware of what hasn't taken shape to hold Donald Trump accountable over decades, as our friend and one of the foremost journalistic experts in Donald Trump has been showing us for now decades, David K. Johnston. And this is what happens when the law does not hold power to account. Like Dr. Phil Zimbardo said, it's a slippery slope, and we're in scary times. I would recommend and encourage every single one of you to please share, like, and subscribe. Please check out the newuntouchables.com. We're going to have new initiatives on Substack. Please check out the cleannewdeal.org. If you have any questions or if you have any access to alliances of like-minded attorneys and legal professionals throughout the country, we would really appreciate having more dialogue. But I don't think there's any way out of this than the leadership of the folks that are on this panel. And I'm grateful for everything that you guys have brought to, this dialogue from the very beginning, and as well to our country for decades. And please, America, you have to know there are professionals amongst us who know how to turn the tables on this, but we have to build a critical mass of people who want to restore law in this country. And that's the challenge of our times. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Patrick Lovell. Take care.